right, so ladies and gentlemen, as we begin the 21st century, we find ourselves at a truly historic turning point. We are at a point of decision. Can everlasting peace take root, or are we doomed to repeat the 20th century's dark and oppressive history of war and conflict? The 20th century was a period of ceaseless struggle, including wars for colonial domination, dominion, the First and Second World Wars, the Korean War, and the Cold War. Living through this era, I dedicated my life entirely to the accomplishment of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of the peaceful ideal world. I've always prayed sincerely that the United Nations, founded after the Second World War, would be an institution of peace, and that it would uphold God's will for the realization of eternal world peace. God is almighty. It was not due to any shortcomings or lack of ability that he has been imprisoned in great pain and has endured immense suffering behind the scenes of history. Rather, there are provisions in the principle of restoration, which he was not free to disclose, that called him to wait with forbearance until Adam and Eve's positions, lost at the human fall, were recovered with the appearance of the perfected true parents. Although God is all-powerful, he will not set aside the eternal laws and principles that he himself established. Then what would have been the ideal that God hoped to achieve through the creation of humankind? It was to fulfill the four-position foundation. The four-position foundation signifies Adam and Eve in a state of complete union with God. That makes it impossible for them to separate from God's realm of love, no matter how hard they may try. In other words, it refers to the foundation of a family with God at its center, established when husband and wife have achieved complete oneness, not only with each other, but also with God, and when they have become an ideal couple and given birth to ideal children. When the family four-position foundation is thus completed, that family becomes a family of the ideal of creation desired by God. And this is from the Peace Messages given by Reverend Sun Myung. So with that reading, to get us started, then I would like to invite up our elder brother, John Kennedy. If everyone give him a round of applause. Welcome to the
stage. I thought about this theme. The theme is not there, but it's just like reflecting on the heart of God, really, behind the scenes of history. When we study the principle, True Father has said that wars and conflicts occur for all kinds of reasons, and there are all kinds of external reasons for human conflict. But there's actually, he said, in our True Father's teaching was that there's a more internal cause for conflict, and it goes back to the origin of human history itself. And Father talks about the origin, the beginning point of human history, where humankind allowed Satan to come into and take over the lineage of human beings. That actually, from that beginning point, then that's where the origin of evil comes. That's where he said there was a starting point for this evil, and it's not that it's inevitable and it's never going to end. Because there's a beginning point, then there is a possibility we can overcome evil. So like in the readings today, we talk about, is war inevitable, or are we doomed to repeat, human history over and over again, keep repeating the same old wars and conflicts? And I asked that myself, that question, particularly coming into the 21st century. When I think you were you around when the 21st century started, year 2000? You were? Anybody else? Actually, most people were around. But I really thought that, okay, new century means end of wars, end of conflict. There's going to be hopeful history. But very quickly you realize that once the new year starts, there's a conflict somewhere. There's somebody was murdered somewhere, you know. So everything continues. So from that point of view, we could almost feel hopeless, you know, that it's almost impossible to change human nature. But I think we have great hope because of our understanding of good and evil, that goodness is the fundamental nature of human beings. Evil is something that we allowed to come into our lineage, to come into human history. It wasn't like that God had intended this to occur. There is no such thing as duality. You know, good and evil coexist, and it doesn't, and one will, you know, the evil could overcome goodness. No, goodness will eventually prevail because it's God's original ideal. So that's a very important understanding. And as we know now, like we in Europe, we're quite touched by the fact a war broke out quite unexpectedly, and between Ukraine and Russia, at least from a certain perspective, it happened quite suddenly. But there's many reasons behind that, and there's many analysis of that situation. And I'm, as much as everybody else, interested in that. But I think more important is the internal reasons, which we cannot easily perceive. And also, we cannot easily feel God's heart behind human history. You know, how does God feel? Is God happy or sad? Is God suffering? Most times we don't really feel God suffering, you know, because we maybe grew up in a very nice environment and you had a happy life, and you might feel, oh, God is happy, God is comfortable. But when a war happens, we feel very much God suffering. And because I joined in with the prayers on the European level, they had 5 already. European level of Middle East prayers for the situation between Ukraine and Russia. I really felt a new level of prayer between, you know, our hearts and our brothers and sisters. We kind of sensed, you know, God's heart behind human history. How does God feel when he sees his children fighting and killing each other? And particularly the situation in the between Ukraine and Russia is very much like brothers and sisters. They're very close in their history and their family relationships and all of that. So it's really like the historical conflict that keeps coming up. We describe it in the principle, the Cain-Abel conflict, that this is the historical root of the conflict that emanated from the fallen family, that Cain killed Abel, and you know, and that repeats itself throughout history on different dimensions or levels, you know, like on a family level or a tribal level or a, you know, national level. This is not the first war, of course, but it touches us because we are Europeans and we feel touched by Europeans, or it's so close to us. I was just recently reading a book about Afghanistan, and you know, there've been wars and conflicts in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan, but Afghanistan to me is very distant. You know, I knew it was terrible things happened, and then I read this book by a young person who grew up in that situation, and he describes his suffering, and I really felt, wow, this is crazy, because the way he describes it was he from a very young age there was conflict, there was war, there was the Soviet invasion, there was the ethnic conflict, there was finally the Taliban came to power. It was all like within a sphere of 12 years or something in his life, you know. But I could feel his heart as a child, you know, and his determination that to get out of that situation, but the trauma that human beings go through war. You know, as a child, particularly, he suffered extremely. And it was only later when he was able to leave and go to, eventually go to England, and he could become a doctor and he could go back to help his own people, that you feel, oh my, the tragedy of war, the tragedy of conflict, you know. But in his writings, he doesn't even try to come to a reason why. You know, he just says, I lived through these experiences. I lived through this kind of situation. Like, there isn't even a concept to figure out, why does it happen? Why were these conflicts going on? Well, that's just one example, but I think we can feel more connected to brothers and sisters all over the world, because if we really thought about it, we're all children of God. It doesn't matter the culture, the language, the nationality, the religion. We're all fundamentally God's children. But because we don't know people, then we don't have a connection. And so it's easy to put it out of our mind, or to just what comes up in our face or our attention. You know how the media always brings to your attention certain things for a certain period of time, and then it just goes into the background, but it's not gone away. It's just that there's the focal of attention is right there, you know, at that point in time, or in a war situation. But I also feel that God is a bit like that. You know, like when there's something like a war happens, God and the good spirit world and the angels and all our prayers are focused on that at that moment. Okay, let's try and solve this one quickly, in a way that it's got God's attention, it's got our attention. Means we're praying and hoping that it can be resolved quickly, because we know that if it carries on, then it entrenches the enmity, it entrenches the resentments that can build up. So there's a solution, there's a hope. Okay, quickly, we can solve this one. And did you notice that all the world now is coming together to try to fix that problem? It's like somebody who is sick, and all the cells in the body want to heal it quickly. You know, all the organs working together, and the cells and everything to heal the sickness. I really felt that in this situation, this is how God is working today, you know, because in the beginning, and if we look back through history, and it very clearly says in divine principle, God could not intervene in any situation, only to a very limited extent. Even though God is powerful, he has power, he is almighty, he's very limited in how he can intervene, because human beings have a certain responsibility. And unless they can fulfill that responsibility, then he can't really intervene. But I feel now there's more possibility that humanity as a whole can receive assistance from God and from the good spirit world to solve a problem. And I think that's why we're coming together more quickly. Problems coming out more faster, you know, straight after the COVID situation, we have a war in Europe. It's remarkable. It seems like, why now? Why so quickly? And people say that if you know, on the news, and say, oh, like unexpectedly something happened. It's a bad thing, but sometimes bad things have to happen in order to bring a healing or a solution. You know, it has to come out and be open. Like things that are hidden never get solved, you know, somehow through this kind of situation. There might be a better solution, better thing come forward. Now human beings, nations, peoples are suffering. Russian people are suffering economically in all kinds of ways, Ukrainian people even more so. The rest of Europe and the rest of the world will suffer because of all these sanctions. Maybe it's very little compared to the actual suffering of war itself, but it's like human beings are like, they're willing to pay a price to bring lasting peace. And that's something that can be very positive, actually. So that's one of the things I feel is that something good coming out of this situation. Of course, it's nothing to do with ourselves, maybe. We think, well, this is nothing to do with my life. This is the big situation. This is the world. This is the cosmos, you know. But I think that also God is really trying to come into our lives on a personal or a family level, you know, that he has a lot of patience and he never intervenes except at the right time when you can touch people's hearts, or because I've gone through situations myself, my family life, and I've experienced this, you know, I've experienced God's parental heart, you know, that, oh, God has to teach me something through something very deep in order that I can understand God's heart, God's situation a little bit better, you know, that to realize that God can't really work unless he can work through each one of us, you know. He cannot really express his love unless he can express it through each one of us, who becomes the embodiment of his love and his perfection. You know, that's another part of divine principle. It says that because Adam and Eve were supposed to grow to maturity, and if they grow into maturity, to perfection, then God would have dwelt from the very beginning in the human race as the substance of himself through the true parents, that God would be living with us on earth in the perfection of the unity, perfection of love. So this would mean that God could intervene then. He can bring better solutions to things if we listened to this, if we understood this. Now, we haven't had that until now. We've never had this perfection we've never had this perfection of character or love. We've never had perfect parents. We've always been dealing with things as limited or imperfect, or like brothers and sisters that fight with each other, you know, and we don't see God's viewpoint. We rarely see the big viewpoint or the parental viewpoint. So now we have all this possibility to come into this dimension of a relationship with God as a heavenly parent, and we ourselves can mature our hearts through going through sometimes you have to go through some kind of suffering. It doesn't mean that you have to go around all the time like that, but you need to feel God isn't just, you know, as human beings are suffering, then God is suffering. The most fundamentally, throughout the history, has to be that God has suffered more so even than human beings, because he couldn't really help human beings. He couldn't bring his solution. He couldn't bring his presence, and he has to be hiding behind the scenes. And even the fact is, nobody knows even if God is there. You know, they never even talk to God or communicate and ask God, you know, what's the best way to solve this? Or it's like in a family that between parents and children, if the children listen to the parents, then they will communicate, and they will ask questions, and they will find solutions. But oftentimes, it isn't like that. Children just ignore their parents, and they think they know best. And one thing, you might have heard this in the Genesis, that it says that God, as he expresses the fall like this, that God asked them not to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but they didn't. And that struck me like, that's a commandment, and you don't give commandments to you only give a commandment to a little child. You know what I mean? You say, don't go to the street, be careful there, don't do this, don't do that. So, but I understood it this week is that that was the commandment for little children. And once they got that, then they already had the start of a relationship with their parent, with God. Like, okay, this is a small thing, but like if you tell your child, don't go to this, then if they listen to you, that's good. Now, when they grow a little bit older, they're going to ask you, oh, well, what about that? The archangel is telling me this love is something to be, or something like this. And then Eve would say, okay, would ask God even, well, what should I do in this case? It should have been a communication. So I'm telling you this because it's so important for family education, because if you have children, you have to start very young to establish a very close relationship and have give and take. And so they're very close in heart, because the fundamental aspect of the fall is that there was a distance in heart that came between Adam and Eve and God. It's not just a sexual fall. That's just the result. The main problem is the artistic distance between human beings and their creator. The main problem in a family usually is a artistic distance between the children and the parents. And sometimes it can be close, and if it's close, that's wonderful. But oftentimes, these are things that don't happen easily or naturally. But we're trying to create a new pattern of living together, especially in the sense of creating an ideal family, because that's the goal. We're going to go through the wars, we're going through all kinds of things, but ultimately we want to establish ideal families and bring other people into that relationship through perfection of love and through having God at the center. The blessing itself, without God at the center, isn't really that meaningful. The blessing, Eli will talk about the blessing, but I've just wanted to add a little point. Blessing at the Unification Church is a blessing centered on God's love and heart. Of course, we can enjoy the relationship of love without God. Human beings do that. But the fundamental meaning of the blessing is we are inviting God into that relationship. We're also going to take responsibility for some aspect of God's heart, maybe uniquely through each blessed couple. You find, I have something here to liberate God. I liberate through your own life, through your own relationship. You may experience some problems, which you might not see until much later, but then that's your opportunity, something to liberate God's heart through that. It's not always, and it's, of course, I just want to make that point. I don't go around, shedding tears or really understanding God's suffering. I just glimpse a little bit, and I feel now grateful for something that I've learned a little bit more about parental heart, God's parental heart. How God is incredibly forbearing, incredibly patient, incredibly consistent, never giving up on human beings, never giving up on establishing an ideal world, a peaceful world, even though sometimes it looks distant, and sometimes it looks like it's crazy. It's not happening. We're repeating things. We seem to be repeating. The only thing I'd like to say is that maybe we are repeating things, but I think we're going through cycles and repeating, but it's getting better. That's the point that I feel, and it's coming faster, but it's going to get better. The world is changing. People are feeling more. We're one family. We're transcending religious differences, cultural differences, national differences. We're creating beautiful, blessed families, transcending nationalities, transcending. And it's happening all around in the world itself, because this is the world itself we're living in is, people want to travel. they want to live in other countries. The Russian young people are very, they're really upset because now their borders are closed. They cannot participate in, international competitions. They can't participate in sporting, cultural, anything. Like that's a real tragedy. I'm not saying, I'm just trying to point out that human beings, young generation, have some different aspirations, and we need to sympathize with that or empathize with that. So that's what I really wanted to say that today, because I often thought also, how come God doesn't intervene more? And you'd often read in when things happen, like I remember years ago, there was this big tsunami in Indonesia, was it, or that part of the world. And then there was a discussion at that time about, how come God doesn't intervene? How could God allow that tragedy to happen, where thousands of people actually lost their lives? And there was a discussion in the newspapers about that. And eventually, a very good discussion, but nobody could really come up to the answer, how come suffering is allowed? But I think when we understand divine principle a little bit better, we know that the limits in God's intervention, but also how much God really wants to intervene in our lives, in our daily lives, and also on the national or international world level. So I'm sorry it's not too long today. I didn't want to go into any political side of it, just to express some heart behind it. And I'd like to conclude with a prayer. Our beloved Heavenly Parents, we thank you so much. We're really grateful for your love and kindness to us. And we're grateful that we can go through situations that let us taste a little bit your heart, and let us recognize your suffering heart as well. I know that we're quite unique in that sense, that we recognize your suffering situation. Most people probably don't, and they think that you're very comfortable, very exalted, all-powerful, beyond all of these things, that you don't really even care about what happens on this earth amongst your children. But because of true parents coming to the world, true parents explain to us so many times through blood, sweat, and tears that you're truly a parent that wants to be with his children, wants to experience everything with your children, and to be truly with us in everything. Ultimately, we want to reach that end goal, a world where there is no war, there are no conflicts, and that human conflict will come to an end, and that we can live and create an eternal peace on this earth. It seems far-reaching and far-fetched, but we have to imagine such a world, which is a world of transcendence, a world of living together, cooperating, and everybody living for the sake of others, all humankind, all nations living for other nations, and all power. That's now the most important thing for human beings, is this power, or this even economic power, will come to an end, and that artistic relationships will be mostly valued, and then all other things will fall into place. If we seek your kingdom and its righteousness, other things will fall into place. We're really praying, Heavenly Parents, for this kind of heart today, and thank you for our brothers and sisters coming together. Let's pray together and continue to do your will. I pray this, and I offer our blessings and my blessings to my brothers and sisters in this community and throughout this nation. I pray this, report this in the name of John Kennedy, blessed central family. Adieu.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, John, for that very heartfelt reflection. let's jump into our holy song, our closing holy song. A little slower than it's usually, but still a very nice song. Okay, so I'll just give a couple of announcements. Most